In 1849, a 5-year-old boy watched his father die slowly from a disease of the brain. For an entire year, he watched the man who preached of God, the man who was supposed to have answers, suffer without reason and without relief. And then his father was gone. The following year, his younger brother died too. He was 6 years old. That boy's name was Friedrich Nietzsche. And before he wrote a single word of philosophy, before he became the youngest professor ever hired at the University of Basel, before he produced the works that would reshape Western thought, he had already encountered the central question his entire life would try to answer. Why does inherited belief fail the people who need it most? His father was a Lutheran pastor, a good man, a faithful man, and faith did not save him. Nietzsche spent his childhood inside that contradiction. The God his father served let his father suffer. And somewhere in that suffering, the foundation of everything Nietzsche had been handed began to crack. Not with anger, not with rebellion, with a child's honest confusion at a world that didn't behave the way the adults had promised it would. You need to understand this before you understand anything else about Nietzsche, because the philosophy he built was not built in a library. It was not built in comfort. It was not the product of a man who had everything and chose to question it out of intellectual curiosity. It was built in the rubble of everything that failed him: his faith, his health, his relationships, his career, eventually his sanity. And in that rubble, walking alone through the Swiss Alps, sick, isolated, largely unread, producing books that almost no one bought, he found something. Not comfort, not resolution, clarity. A philosophy that did not promise to protect you from suffering. A philosophy that said, suffering is not the problem. The problem is that you have been carrying someone else's answer to your own life, and as long as you carry it, you will never discover whether you had one of your own. That is what this video is about. Not Nietzsche's biography, your life. But you need to understand what he went through to understand why what he discovered is worth the cost of knowing it. By the time Nietzsche was a young man, he'd already done something most people never do. He looked at the belief system he was handed, and he asked whether it was true. Not whether it was comforting, not whether it made life easier. Whether it was actually true. One semester studying theology at the University of Bonn was enough. He left, not dramatically, not with a manifesto, just quietly, honestly, with the recognition that he could not maintain a belief he could no longer justify. Most people never reach this moment, not because they are more faithful, but because the examination itself is too threatening. To question what you were given is to risk losing the ground you have been standing on. And most people would rather stand on uncertain ground than stand on nothing. Nietzsche stood on nothing, and from that nothing he began to build. In his masterwork, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he described this process through what he called the 3 metamorphoses of the spirit. Not 3 stages of success, not 3 levels of achievement, 3 deaths and rebirths. The first is the camel. The camel kneels, it says, "Load me." It takes on every weight the world offers, every expectation, every inherited belief, every value handed down by family, culture, religion, society. And it carries these weights not with resentment, but with pride. Because the camel believes that bearing the heaviest load is the highest virtue. Nietzsche was a camel once, the good son of a pastor, the obedient student of theology, the youngest professor ever hired at Basel, kneeling under the weight of other people's definitions of what a brilliant young man was supposed to become. You know, the camel. You might be the camel, the one who works hardest and asks for least, the one who does what is expected because doing what is expected feels like integrity. The camel is not weak. The camel is often impressive, but the camel is carrying someone else's map through its own life, and it will carry that map across the entire desert of its existence and call the journey meaningful without ever once asking, did I choose this direction? Most people die as camels. Nietzsche had grief for them, because the camel is capable of so much more than obedience. The second metamorphosis is the lion. At some point, if the spirit is strong enough, the camel enters the desert alone. And in that desert, it encounters what Nietzsche called the great dragon. He named the dragon Thou Shalt. The dragon is every rule you were given, every value you were told was sacred, every identity you were expected to maintain. And the dragon says, all value has already been created. All meaning has already been assigned. Obey. The lion does not obey. The lion says, I will. It fights the dragon. It questions everything it was given. It refuses to carry the load any further. Nietzsche became the lion when he walked out of theology, when he left academia, when he abandoned the career, the reputation, the position, to walk alone through the Alps and think for himself. This stage feels like freedom. It feels like awakening. And so most people who reach it stop here. They become professional destroyers. They tear down inherited values and build nothing in their place. They call their emptiness sophistication. They call their nihilism enlightenment. They mistake the raw for the destination. But Nietzsche was clear. The lion cannot create. It can only make space. And a spirit that only destroys without building anything from the rubble is not free. It is just a different kind of prisoner. The third metamorphosis is the child. The child does what neither the camel nor the lion can do. The child creates, not from inherited values, not from rebellion against inherited values, from something older and quieter, the will toward its own nature. Nietzsche spent the loneliest years of his life in this stage, sick, isolated, writing books almost no one read, but building, producing. Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil, The Genealogy of Morals, work that would reshape Western philosophy long after he was gone. He didn't know that then. He built anyway, not for recognition, not for validation, not because the world was watching, because the work was what he was. The child does not ask, what am I supposed to be? The child asks, what am I actually becoming? And then it builds toward that with the full force of its nature. No apology, no permission, no audience required. So here is the question Nietzsche would put to you directly. Which metamorphosis are you in? Are you a camel still kneeling under a load someone else packed? Are you a lion tearing things down with no idea what to build? Or have you found the child? The part of you that creates from its own center without needing the world to confirm the direction. Most people are camels pretending to be lions. They have rejected some values. They feel awake. They call themselves different. But they are still fundamentally living in reaction to what they were given rather than in creation of what they actually are. Nietzsche called that the most subtle form of slavery. Nietzsche had a word for what happens to people who never make it past the camel. Resentment, not resentment. Resentment is not an emotion. It is a way of being. It is what happens when a person suppresses their will toward their own nature for long enough that the suppression becomes their identity. They stop wanting to become. They start wanting others not to become. You know this person, the one who calls ambition arrogance, the one who calls excellence showing off, the one who has built an entire moral framework out of the values that happen to justify their stagnation. Nietzsche saw resentment as the primary spiritual disease of his era. He would see it everywhere today. In the comment sections, where mediocrity polices excellence. In the relationships where one person's growth is experienced by the other as a personal attack. In the quiet inner voice that tells you that wanting more is selfish, that ambition is vanity, that the life you have is the life you deserve. That voice is not your conscience. That is the dragon talking. That is the accumulated weight of every inherited value that was loaded onto you before you had the language to examine it. And here is what Nietzsche understood that most people never confront. Resentment is comfortable. It requires nothing from you. You never have to risk anything. You never have to build anything. You never have to become anything. You just have to maintain a permanent, low-grade resentment towards the world and call it wisdom. Nietzsche called it spiritual cowardice dressed in the language of maturity. Because the person living in resentment is not suffering from a lack of opportunity. They are suffering from a refusal to exercise the most terrifying freedom any human being possesses, the freedom to decide who they are going to become. This freedom is terrifying because it comes with full accountability. If you decide who you are, then you are responsible for what you become. You cannot blame the family. You cannot blame the economy. You cannot blame the circumstances that made the camel necessary. You can only ask, what am I doing with what I have been given? Nietzsche knew the weight of this question better than anyone who ever lived, because he had nothing left to blame for his life. No faith to lean on, no institution to shelter him, no audience to validate him, no health to sustain him, just the work and the terrifying, clarifying freedom of a man who had stripped away every borrowed answer and had to build his own. He paid for that freedom with everything. In January 1889 in Turin, Nietzsche saw a horse being flogged in the street. He ran to it. He threw his arms around it. He said, "I understand you. I understand you." And then his mind broke. He never recovered. He spent the last 11 years of his life in a state of mental collapse. The man who wrote about strength, about will, about self-overcoming, collapsed in an act of pure compassion for a suffering animal. Most people read this as tragic irony. I read it differently. That was not weakness. That was a man who had been carrying the weight of the entire human condition alone, in the mountains, in the dark, for 20 years, finally breaking under it. He understood the horse because he had been the horse. Flogged by suffering he did not choose, by illness he did not deserve, by a world that did not read his books until he was no longer there to know it. He died in 1900 at 55, unknown, largely unread, and his work went on to reshape Western philosophy more profoundly than almost any thinker who came before or after him. That is not irony. That is Amor fati made literal. Before the breakdown, before the darkness, Nietzsche gave this philosophy a name: Amor fati, love of fate, not acceptance of fate, not tolerance of fate, not making peace with what you cannot change. Love, active, unconditional, total. He wrote, I want to learn more and more to see as beautiful what is necessary in things. Then I shall be one of those who make things beautiful. Amor fati means you take everything that has happened to you. The father who died young, the faith that collapsed, the illness, the isolation, the years of being unread and unknown, and you do not wish any of it away. You claim it, you say, this is the material I was given, and then you build with it, not in spite of it, from it. Nietzsche understood that the person who spends their life wishing their past were different will never build anything real from their present. They will spend their entire existence renegotiating with history instead of creating from where they actually stand. His father's death was the material. His abandoned faith was the material. His illness was the material. His isolation was the material. His breakdown was the material. All of it went into the work. And the work outlived him by more than a century and is still outliving him now. That is what self-overcoming actually looks like. Not a clean transformation, not a triumphant arrival. A man alone in the mountains, sick and largely unknown, writing books no one was reading, carrying a question the world wasn't ready to answer yet, and writing anyway, building anyway, becoming anyway. This is the hardest philosophy ever written. Not because it asks you to suffer, but because it asks you to stop making suffering the reason you are not yet who you could be. It asks you to look at everything that has happened to you, every borrowed belief that failed you, every identity that no longer fits, every year spent as a camel under someone else's load, and claim it, all of it, as yours, as the necessary raw material of the person you are still becoming. Nietzsche never arrived. He built until he couldn't build anymore, and then his work arrived for him long after he was gone. He is asking you to do the same, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, not when the conditions improve. Now, with exactly what you have, from exactly where you are. The person you are now is not the finished version, but it is the only material you will ever have to build from. And what you make from it is the only question that was ever worth asking. Most people will watch this and feel something, then return to the camel, return to the load, return to the borrowed life that almost fits. That is their choice. If you are not most people, if something in this video didn't just resonate but disturbed you in the way that only true things disturb, then you already know what comes next. You don't need permission. You don't need the right moment. You don't need this channel. But if you want to keep going deeper, subscribe. Not because the content is good, because you have already decided you are not done becoming. And neither is this channel.